allow them to each give us an introduction, a background about their foundation, what they do. And I think they have some advice for people who are might be seeking support from these foundations. And then we'll open it up for questions. So we'll start with
Okay.
Dr. Annette. And I forgot to say that Lori Watson was unable to join us. So we'll try and fill her space. So Dr. Annette.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Annette. I'm enrolled at the White Earth Indian Reservation, and I am an honorary member of the Red Lake Nation here in Minnesota. I've been working for the Blandin Foundation for about 5 years now, and prior to that spent 26 years working with tribes on health care. I worked with the Indian Health Service. The Blandin Foundation is 75 years old, and our donors' charge to us was strengthen rural communities, especially in our Grand Rapids local area. So we're very much limited, and yet what we can do is pretty terrific because we work with rural communities in Minnesota, which of course includes our tribal communities. One of the things we've always felt that for Minnesota to be healthy, everyone in all of our communities needs to be healthy. So how do we do this? We do this in a number of ways. One is we work in leadership. For years, there was a Blandin Community Leadership Program that was outstanding, and there may be some of you in the room that actually went through this program. But it wasn't quite working for our Native communities. So we have a sister organization or a sister program called the Blandin Reservation Community Leadership Program, where we bring 26 people from different communities in, tribal communities, spend a week, and then they meet afterwards to carry on projects and leadership projects in their communities. So our Blandin Reservation Community Leadership Program is one of the ways that we provide the program. We also give out grants, and there's 3 strategic areas we have for grants that we give, and that's in education, economy, and inclusion. And if you think about that, wow, where does early childhood education fit in there? It's a sweet spot, isn't it? Because early education's under education. It's going to impact the economy, which we've talked about for the last few days. And inclusion is making sure that we have people throughout our state that are part of our programming. So those are the areas that we tend to work on. Our biggest grant that we've given, however, has been over 20 years, $40 million commitment. And that's to early childhood education in our county. Remember I said we have a special emphasis in our local giving area. And wow, we've had measurable and immeasurable outcomes that come out of that. And should I take the time right now and talk a little bit about this, or how would you want to do this?
Go ahead.
Okay. We started off 10 years ago, and the local community came forward, and I actually, a little over 10 years ago, I was on the board, and the local community came forward and said, we need to emphasize early childhood for all the reasons that many of you have said, and let's see if we can get it really to replicate in some of our rural communities close. And our board said, okay, go back, refine it a bit, come back. I remember this clearly because this was a big thing. This is a lot of money back 10 years ago to say, you know, we'll commit 20 million for 10 years. They came forward again with even a more refined grant request, and we said yes. And wow, what they've shown. Much of what you've talked about in terms of being model programs and what we should offer, we've been able to do because, for example, Invest Early it's a wraparound program for at-risk children and their families, and they coordinate several of the efforts or programs that are available locally. And what we're seeing are core services. We have 4. One is we have specialized classrooms and extended hours, and I've heard about that. Parenting education, the importance of that, health services, home visits. That's the core that we provide for all of our children that are in our Invest early program. But then we have additional services that are available if the need is there or interest for some of the families. For example, adult basic education, transportation, extended care. We have child care 5 days a week times 12 months. And of course, mental health support. So those are the things that are merged in our communities to be very, very important. Now, part of what makes Invest Early work is that it weaves federal, state, and local funding streams as we look at how can we look at all of these to provide the services that this child and family needs. And of course, Blandin gives $2 million every year for this program too. Every child's success is what's at the center of Invest Early. And if we can go to communities and others and say this is at the heart, all agree. And because of this, what we've seen is authentic partnerships are possible without the turf battles we sometimes see or the silos that exist. That's been something that we've seen emerge over the past 10 years. Some other things that I've heard. For families, cooperation among the agencies means one application. You know, one of the things that really has bothered families saying how many programs and I have to go and fill this, this, and this out. They've worked one application. Invest Early is now in its 10th cohort. And out of these there are 25% are Indigenous children. And we were talking this morning, and you had me thinking, you know, we talked a bit about the urban population that needs to be served or the reservation population. Our cohorts, our community is not reservation. It's off reservation. So how about these kids that are, you know, kind of in between reservation and urban? There's a number of children, 25% of who we serve, that are out there too. And what we've seen over the past 10 years is that home learning improvements much improved. Kindergarten readiness is up 40% than their peers. In fact, I thought what was interesting the first year or two when we were measuring children's readiness, what we saw was in the first year or two, the kids that were in the program outperformed everyone for the first 2 years, and then sort of came back down to not as the rest of the cohort that didn't access the program, but just at the same level as the others. Fascinating. Early childhood screenings are happening earlier. We've seen this, and risk factors are identified much earlier by age 3. And what I've learned here at this conference is how good. The earlier, the better. That's the message that I've received from all of you. And of course, we're the long-term return on investment, which we are currently measuring, is what happens when you have a family and a child that can access services. The long-term investments in terms of fewer out-of-home placements or remedial education is not as necessary. Higher wages occur, less substance abuse, and other social challenges that any of us could make a list. But from the Blandin Foundation's perspective, as we look at this, there's 4 main things that we see really makes it work. One is the absolute commitment to quality that our groups have taken. The teachers, their curriculum. We have a critical mass and intensity, and that intensity is needed in programs to make a difference. Accountability is there. I loved our discussion today about what accountability is, maybe looking at it from a different perspective. You know, what's your vision? Have you got there? I thank you for that. It's a system that works for families, so children benefit. So when you have the Invest Early program, it's the child may be at the centers, but it's the circles around that also get the support, family and communities strengthen. We're committed to supporting educational efforts, economic development, and inclusion. So again, what this is the sweet spot, the sweet spot. Now what we've done is we've actually committed another $20 million for another 10 years to continue this. One of the things that we've noted is that the first 10 years, much of our assessment was and we already know this too in some ways. Does this work and make a difference when you have programs such as this? Of course it does. So some of the challenge now as we go forward, how can we assess maybe the systems that are impacting our children and our families?
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. And so next we'll go to Mr. Guy from the Better Way Foundation.
Mark is just fine.
Okay, Mark, thank you.
Then either that's Guy Smiley is the other thing I get from Sesame Street. So. But it's interesting to be on this panel just from our foundation's perspective, because we are in a very different place than the Blandin Foundation, and we have so much we could learn from all of your efforts as well. And so it's an honor to be on this panel with you, and so grateful to the Federal Reserve Bank for inviting us to participate in this as well. My name is Mark Guy. I'm a senior program officer with Better Way Foundation. And Better Way Foundation is a small private family foundation that is based here in the Twin Cities and is actually one of a network of 5 foundations that are all associated with the same family. And that family has an over 50-year history of philanthropic giving. And so it is a very exciting and interesting place to work, given the fact that we interface with, my colleague Andreas and I interface with other colleagues that are working with the other foundations. So there's a lot of cross-sharing that goes on between the staff because we're all working on different issues. Better Way Foundation works both domestically and internationally. We are not new to the ECD space. We've been funding ECD efforts both in the US as well as internationally in Tanzania and Lesotho for about a decade now. And we are also not new to working and supporting Native communities. Better Way Foundation and the family itself actually has a long history, for instance, with Red Cloud Indian School in South Dakota that goes back to the 70s. But Better Way has been supporting 5 schools on 5 different reservations around the country for about the past 8 or 9 years. And a lot of the work that we have supported there has been with these schools and in areas of language revitalization and culture. For instance, the Lakota Language Project at Red Cloud, Better Way was one of the first funders that invested in that. We're also doing Apache language work with St. Charles Apache School on the St. Carlos Apache Reservation. We've also been involved in paraprofessional development and professional development in general for teachers in these schools. Better Way was able to support the founding of a network of these 5 schools to come together to do things like professional development and cross-learning and sharing of their efforts and just bringing them together to understand that there's others out there like them that are serving the children that they are. But we are fairly new, I would say, to the ECD space in Native communities. And so that's why it's exciting for us to be a part of this gathering, because we very much are in a learning and a listening phase to understand what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what is the context of ECD in Native communities. We've made some initial investments in those areas, either based upon the partnerships that we already had with some of the schools. For instance, we funded a school, a Navajo Nation in St. Michael, Arizona, in their pre-kindergarten program, which just started last year. We've also made some initial investments to Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. Matthew, who was up here yesterday, did a great job talking about their Lakota immersion preschool and kindergarten program. That was one of the first areas that we were able to invest in, as well as with Ogallala Lakota College's Head Start program on Pine Ridge. And we also have, so I would say we're newer in the space of working in tribal communities and Native communities in the rural areas. We do have some experience in ECD work with Native communities in the urban area, primarily through a partnership with St. Catherine's University here in the Twin Cities and their work with the Montessori Training Center that is working a bit with Native urban populations here. But we very much are trying to gather as much of an understanding as possible with the intent of serving what the board has put forth from a meeting they had back in June of this year, a 5-year commitment to investing in ECD in Native communities. So we're very excited about that in terms of our staff work with that, but still have a lot to learn. And so that's a part of the reason why we're grateful to be a part of this convening, but also be a part of this panel. And I would say that just a bit more about our approach and what we look to do in those investments. We work very much in a spirit of partnership. Better Way Foundation has a strong belief in the importance of long-term, place-based approaches that work in that spirit of partnership, and also in a spirit of convening and collaboration. That's been a big part of our success, both internationally and domestically, with some of the schools that we've been working with. And particularly when it comes to working in the Native communities, a strong belief in the foundation and within the board of the importance of language and culture. And so that's been wonderful to hear in the participants that have been up here to speak over the past 2 days, and understanding that we're on the right track there. And I think that's important for us to continue to measure. As we talk about measurement, is are we aligning with what's important to the communities in which we're trying to support. And I would say the last thing to highlight is that as we look particularly at ECD and Native communities, we're tasked, the staff, we are tasked by the board at coming at it from a systemic and a holistic approach. And while a lot of the work that Better Way has put in around ECD to date has been on the education aspect of early childhood development, there's very much an understanding that that isn't the only thing that goes with it. There is the aspect of maternal child health, there's nutrition, there is the mental health and the dealing with historical trauma that plays into it. These aspects of language and culture and family involvement and parenting, all of that has to come into play. And so as we continue on this early phase of learning and understanding where the opportunities are, we obviously have our sights tuned on the education aspect of ECD, but also where might our efforts need to and have to dovetail in these other aspects. And so we're excited to be on this journey and look forward to continuing to learn from all of you and all of our colleagues in this space, and grateful again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So I think at this point, we'll open it up to questions.
Can I
from
say
the
a few more
audience.
things?
Oh, yes.
Gee, I didn't think I'd have, but
Okay.
can't.
Go ahead.
I've been here for 2 days, and I've had more than 2 or 3 people come up to me, and the last one was Barb, and they keep bringing up some of the unmet needs that we have in doing the work that we have. And what came up is the resources to build infrastructure. For example, Leech Lake, I just recently talked, they have perhaps some representation here too, but at Leech Lake right now, there are 50 toddlers in line. We have enough programming, existing resources that we could serve 32 more. We don't have the space. So space and building, this is what I'm hearing from tribes, are some of the unmet needs. Another thing that I hear is that early childhood care on tribal lands is still informal. We have parenting, but we also have aunts and uncles and grandma and friends that all have a role in terms of taking care of children. And somehow, if we can focus some of our funding, public funding, some of our funding on access and quality and training for these informal providers, that might be very much a worthy investment for us to think of. That's the second thing I've heard. The third thing that I've heard as I've gone out and listened to tribes is that Native children, of course, must have access to culturally relevant education. Now, at the Blandin Foundation, like you, we do give grants for language and culture activities. But you know, our way of looking at has changed significantly over the past 10 years. There was a time when these grants came in and they were nice. And somehow through all of this and really listening, we need to know that they're not just nice, they're necessary for us to go forward. Mm-hmm. And the last thing that I just want to say is I know we can do better in all of this, but what really jives me is the hope that still exists on all of our reservations. When we meet and talk to people, they say the youth and our children are still at the center of where our caring is. And that brings me great hope because those kids are the seeds of true and pure and good hope for our people. And I think we can make a difference.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I want to call on Fred Fisher to respond to the first issue about building buildings. Fred Fisher is currently embedded in the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development program, and they are an underutilized federal program. How many billions of dollars do they have, Fred? $200 billion, and they build buildings. So you want to tell them how they can access this?
Yes, well, they build a lot of things. They also support a lot of things too with these, and most of the money that's available through USDA Rural Development is in loans. There's a small percentage of what they offer in the form of grants that people may want to take advantage of, particularly people who are working with seniors or kinship care. There are some grants that are available to low-income seniors for housing rehab and fixing homes. For example, if you wanted to add a new bedroom to a home or work on your plumbing and those kinds of things. But the thing that's really important about what Kathleen just said was there's a really robust community facilities program within USDA Rural Development, and one really good example that hits home for this particular convening is that Spirit Lake Tribe in North Dakota. I think there's a woman that I met from North Dakota this morning who's been working very closely with rural development staff in North Dakota. But the Spirit Lake Tribe in North Dakota built a brand new Head Start Center, or is in the process of building a brand new Head Start Center, and they were able to access a loan. The tribe was able to access a loan through Rural Development's Community Facilities Program that's at 1% over 30 years. So the payments are really low and all of that. So they also offer some underwriting around home mortgage loans. We can get into that later when we get into the home mortgage lending thing. But yes, get to know your state directors in the state that you're in. You can look up USDA Rural Development. You can find who the state director, where the state director's office is, where their contact information is. We're just in the process right now, before I leave, of publishing a document actually that Patrice instigated. That's sort of a guide to USDA rural development programs for tribes that should be out by the end of this year. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
There's not. I've got a few. I've always got a few more things if there's no questions. If you don't mind, I can.
Question. We'll go.
Well, here's a
Let's go with it.
question.
Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne Barrett, and I work at DHS, the Office of Indian Policy. And I'm a former program officer with a local foundation. So one of the things as you've been talking is I've gone to your websites to see how people apply, right? Because that's probably what many people in the room are thinking. Are we a match? And, especially those that are in the state of Minnesota. So Blandin, I see that you've got some focus areas and some good information about how folks potentially submit an application. For your foundation, Mark? I'm sorry.
Yes, Mark.
Mark, how can you advise folks in the audience maybe to approach your foundation for potential funding?
Sure. Better Way Foundation has been a foundation that has been by invitation only in the past, and the network of foundations actually this is a part of the discussion right now, as all the other foundations basically have done the same. But there's been a conversation internally about maybe looking at ways for a more equitable approach for inviting those types of proposals, and that's an ongoing conversation right now. But the way that we work is really looking for those that are out there doing the work. That's why we come to these types of convenings, so that we can meet you all. We can learn about what's happening. We're lucky enough in this foray in terms of early childhood development in Native communities to be working with Echo Hawk Consulting as another means of getting out there and giving us an idea of what's happening in Indian country and around ECD, and who are some of those key players and others that we haven't heard about. So I think it's, to the extent that we can reach out and be available at these types of gatherings, but also, connecting with those types of folks that we're able to send into the field is critical. And there's always, inquiries that come to us that people find our website and contact us, which is always welcome. We just can't always guarantee that there'll be a proposal, but again, we're open to those kinds of conversations and learning at this phase about what's happening and how we might see if there is alignment.
Thank you. I see another question out there. Barb?
Just an FYI, for childcare, tribal childcare programs, there's 9 of them in Minnesota, and I believe there's 260 tribal grantees across the country, and we are the largest HHS grantee with all of their grants. So, and with childcare dollars, we don't get grants for that through our funders. We have to use our operating budget in order to do so. And with the reauthorization, we were just able to get this is the tribal language that we got pushed through, was that we were able to use our operating budget, but then that means you have to reduce services. So you're having to take, so if you have funding and subsidy, or your quality or whatever it is, you can use those dollars, but that's less services to the families. And so, but you can do that if if the construction project is going to increase capacity after the construction. But if that happens, and a lot of tribes can't really afford to do that. So it's one or the other, a facility, and then you got families that are going to have do without for a year or two while you're under construction. So a lot of tribes opt not to do that. Head Start runs a little differently. They have pools of unused grant dollars that goes back, and then they're able to administer these grants for beautiful facilities. So there's the difference between childcare and Head Start options for construction. So.
Bonjour, I'm Brooke from Warukuraring Ojibwe Language Institute, and this is just a more general comment, I guess, more than a question, but in thinking in terms of native language revitalization, I know in my searching for assistance with funds, there's often the geographic focus is very focused on an American definition of we only serve Minnesota and South Dakota or only Wisconsin. But if I just want to suggest for anybody in Foundation to maybe rethink that and how we define, especially if you're interested in native language revitalization, to think in terms of where is this language spoken and what are the original areas where it was spoken, so that you're not maybe excluding Wisconsin, for example, where there's a really great revitalization occurring that really benefits the language as a whole with its growth and revitalization. So, miigwech.
I have a question about when you write proposals to get funding, oftentimes they're read by folks who look at your information, and tribes don't always have the data that they need to be able to even have an application that can go somewhere that meets a criteria. So in philanthropy world, I hear tribal leaders and community folks saying, we are not statistically insignificant, and yet there's no data for this indicator to say we're going to make an improvement on X, Y, Z. So one, are we funding in philanthropy any way of data collection with like EPIs in a significant way that really does tell, like for some tribes they're in 2 states. So how do you pull those data if they're not collecting it themselves? 2, how can we get tribes to do this themselves?
Right. I can take a little bit of a stab at that. I think you're right. Data collection you know, it's a big issue for Indian country. I think that, so what we've done at Casey in trying, you know, we're just trying to figure out how many Indian kids are in foster care. Because you've got tribal systems and you've got state systems. And some kids are, you know, come and go from one, they're in one system and the next year and they're in the other system. And how do we, you know, we want to reduce the number of Indian kids in foster care. We want to keep them home. And so how do we know whether we're being successful? And I agree, it's a challenge. We try and, you know, one of my great resources is Annie E. Casey's Kids Data Count book. They are a great resource. The community surveys that the U.S. Census does, they do those more frequently than they do the U.S. Census. We've relied on those. And then, you know, census data based on counties, and that's not perfect. It doesn't fit reservation boundaries, but sometimes it's a fairly good fit, and you can pick up, you know, the majority of. If you look at the maps, you know, you can always pick out the reservations because they, you know, whatever data point it is, they're either they're usually the worst. You know, if you look at high school graduation rates, who's got the lowest high school graduation rates? You can see it's, you know, it's usually the reservations. And so it, you know, you have to, it's going to have to be a mixture. And I think, you know, foundations understand that you know, it's not always perfect. You have to shop around.
Which is more work.
It is more work. It definitely is more work.
Are you also, though, missing that data block? Are we also missing the data block on urban Indians that are not being counted on the reservation for, say, for a child care program or any other Head Start or things like that because they get lumped into the urban data? Are we missing that? And how much would that skew or affect what we're doing on data collection as for a grant, or we're looking at something like that? Because I'm fairly certain most tribes don't keep that number. They know how many people are enrolled and they know how many live on the reservation, but they don't have the number about how many are receiving services that aren't paid for through reservation dollars or grants because they typically don't fit within the boundary of the reservation, but yet they're still part of that population and they're still part of the, they should still have a right and equal access to them same dollars that are being spent on the reservation as a tribal member.
Well, I think one of the things, I forget who said this, but I think the consensus is there's not enough funding. It's not really a question of urban versus on reservation. There just is not enough funding to go around. So if you're low income and you live in Minneapolis, there isn't enough funding for early childhood for low income or for all people in Minneapolis. And there certainly isn't enough funding on the reservation. So I think it's not an urban reservation issue. I think there just isn't enough, there's not enough resources.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is, there's a need there, a very big unmet need around evidence and data. And to your point about, you know, writing the proposals and how do you provide the data, and again, Anita's point about every foundation is different. I think what we as staff at Better Way Foundation feel fortunate about is this way in which we work in partnership around kind of development of the relationship and working together even on a proposal where we will work with our partners on looking at how to build in some evaluation, and we have the fortune of working with a board that does want rigorous evaluation, but is also understanding that particularly in Indian country, in a lot of Indian country, that just doesn't exist yet. And so it's a process of how do we start to put the building blocks in place in the efforts that we do support to generate some of that evidence and start to build that building of evidence and data through our efforts. And so we take the approach of of looking at that throughout the conversation around the proposal development, and then iterating on it as we go, and understanding that as the project changes and as realities on the ground start to change, so that sometimes you've got to adjust your approach to collecting that evidence and collecting that data and building it. And so I think, again, being in a very different place than something like the Blandin Foundation, kind of starting smaller off at the beginning, that's kind of what we look to do is we know that exists, we know there's a need for that, and so we're trying to think about that, be mindful of it as we build it into the efforts that we support.
Couple of things. One of the things we do is advise any of our folks that are applying for grants, don't be afraid to come and talk to us. Let's sit down. How can we assist you, help you finalize this application? That's one thing, so we can work around some of this in terms of what's needed. But the second piece is, I think those of you that have applied for grants from all different sites would have a really good idea of what are the data, where are the data gaps that you need for different foundations. I mean, I know what we look for, but I'm not sure what every other site looks for. But there must be some common unmet gaps, if you will. What might that be, and then how could we address that? I mean, that's a question that came to my mind as we talked here.
Yes.
So I'm going to hand the mic off in just a second here. Before I do, on the data question, Fred here and I both have some comments about data sources and data initiatives in Indian country. I think in the interest of time, what we maybe will do, Fred, is put an email together and send it out to everyone. But there are some interesting, initiatives going on with NCAI, with Native Nations Institute, some own work we're doing here, some things Fred knows about. We'll get an email put together about Native data initiatives, and we'll get it out to everyone.
Thank you, Dick. My name is Chris Jorgicus. I'm representing the Shakopee, Biddewakan, and Sioux community, and because Lori Watso could not attend this panel, I wanted to just preface my question specifically to Kathy and to Mark, just with a small plug. The SMSC convened with the American Heart Association last year really a first of its kind gathering exactly a year ago called Fertile Ground 1. It was focused on bringing mainstream philanthropy together with representatives of tribal communities, Native organizations working primarily in the area of nutritional health. That was followed by another convening we did in May that EchoHawk Consulting, Crystal EchoHawk here, organized. It was focused specifically on advocacy, and because advocacy has come up on a recurring basis yesterday and today, I just wanted to shamelessly plug a report from that convening, Fertile Ground 2 report. We have some copies here and would encourage you, any of you interested in taking a look at this. We have both hard copies and digital copies that we can make available to you. The question I have for Kathy and Mark is, I mean, you just responded in the last few minutes about what grantees or prospective grantees can do in working with you. I have a bit of a different question. How can we get more mainstream philanthropy players involved in this space and in working with Indian country? And obviously Casey, Blandin, Better Way, Kellogg, a handful of others have been doing this, have been doing it for a long time, but still there is an enormous gulf that has to be bridged to get more investment into Indian country. And I'm just wondering if you can share, both with respect to maybe a specific focus on early childhood development, but also maybe more generally to any advice that you have on this topic.
Two things that I think of right off, and we started our day yesterday with this, is we're all relatives, relationships matter. So what I would say to communities is get to know your foundations, get to know the people, invite them out, invite them to these events. These are some of the things that really make a difference. I mean, I love being able to point in Minnesota to say, I get a call on early childhood and what's happening in Minnesota, call Barb. I mean, or fill in the blank for any number of places. And it's important that we're able to identify champions also in this area. So for funders, I would say build relationships with them, but I would also challenge funders communities build relationship with funders, but we better be out there building relationships too. It's a two-way street, right? So that's one of the things that I would recommend.
And I think along with that, it's also the onus is on the funders to build a relationship with other funders. We have a responsibility as well to advocate on your behalf and on your community's behalf and to find those others that might be out there, might be interested in the areas where we're working, and talk to them as well. And so I think it's also a process of funders building relationships with other funders and talking about the work that we're doing and why it's exciting, why it's important. I think the other thing that goes with that is the more that funders can find opportunities to work together, the stronger that message will be. And when you can come to another funder together with a partner that you're working with as a fellow funder or fellow donor, I think those two voices or three voices together to an audience of funders has a louder voice, has more of an impactful voice. And so I think that's another important piece, because it's not only that there is, I think, we're starting to see a change there, but I think in the past it's been a lot of spread in terms of where funders are working in the different communities that they're in, and the more that funders can come together and coordinate efforts and tackle holistic approaches with the understanding that one foundation can't solve these challenges in these communities alone, that stronger that voice will be, and hopefully the better advocacy we'll have with other funders to bring more to the table.
You know, you couldn't be more right. That's my husband. He usually says wrong, but you couldn't be more right, Mark, on that. In Minnesota alone, I've been in this world for 5 years now, in the foundation world, and after about 3 years, I started saying, how about other rural funders? When do we meet each other and get together? And and I figured it's just because I didn't know, because I haven't walked in these paths. So I went to the Minnesota Council of Foundation, MCF, and I said, the initiative foundations, Northwest area foundations, we all fund rural. When do we get together to share what we know, what the needs are out there, how we might be able to work together? And MCF said, I was so proud, they said, we'll bring you together. So they put out a note, and we all got together and gave a few words, started talking, and what we found out is we had people say, gee, I've been working in rural philanthropy for 30 years, and this is the first time we've ever done this. So one of the challenges you might have for your philanthropies, no matter where you are, is, you might want to get together and talk. Maybe we'll even host a meeting for you, and you'd have access to all of them at once. Just an idea. There's There's all sorts of stuff you could do, right? I mean, be creative. That's the beauty of philanthropy, is you can challenge creativity, ideas, you bring them, you require them, you bring us together to a space, let's do this. I think there's all sorts of opportunity. I got a few, I'm rural, right? That's by donor intent. Mr. Blandin said, you will serve rural communities in Minnesota. But I kind of get involved in some national issues too. And one of the other things that I asked, and I thought you might be interested in, is there was a study done by the USDA and Pender study back in 2005, 2010. And one of the things they showed is that 7%, listen to this, of real value of large foundation grants go to rural places. 19% of the population is rural, okay? There's 19% in rural, but we're getting 7% of the big philanthropy dollars. The other thing that I thought was really, really interesting is that study found that the best predictor in rural counties is college education level. In metro communities, the best predictor of whether you're going to be a successful grantee is poverty. Okay. I'm sitting here, we have poverty in rural too, right? The other thing is 18% of rural counties receive no philanthropy dollars, 18%. While the average in rural is $88 per capita, In some places, it's $0 per capita, and in others, it's $10,000 per capita. But it's usually in those rural places with universities and health centers, so with more resources than others. I just thought this was really interesting because from a rural and from a tribal perspective, we should know data like this in terms of what's happening. And I made another point. I just sit and write points. But the other thing that I've noticed, we need more Native Americans in philanthropy too. Those of us that have lived and know and can bring some different skills and knowledge to this field is really, I think, needed.
And I would just add to what Kathy said that Casey works with an organization called Native Americans in Philanthropy, and which is a national organization. And if you go to their website, I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think the data is something like, Native Americans make up 1 to 1.5% of the population in the United States. And Native Americans receive less than 0.5% of philanthropy dollars. So huge underfunding of rural communities, huge underfunding of Native American communities by philanthropy. So Native Americans of Philanthropy is an organization that we support, and it is a place where foundations can come to learn. Lots of times, and I see a lot of people from a lot of different foundations, they literally do not know where to begin. They don't know, who do I call, where do I go? And so Native Americans in Philanthropy is a place where they can come and begin a conversation about how they might fund Native American communities.
Good afternoon. My name's Gail from Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. My job is people, and I like working with people. So the data piece, I have no clue about. So fortunately, we got permission from Tribal Council to hire a data person for tribal education. What would be some of the key points that I could bring back when this person starts their position to them to be looking for in data for funders?
And this is for early education or for education in general, pre-K to K to 12?
We're 0 to college.
Yeah. As I think about the conversations that we have had within the foundation with our board members about data and what's important, I think, and also with some of the work that our sister foundation, GHR, does in Catholic education here in the Twin Cities on closing the achievement gap. I think things like that, where you're looking at academic achievement, but I think specifically, what has come up in conversations internally for us has been readiness for primary school, and so to the extent that can be measured or looked at, and I think also then transition to primary school as well, because early childhood development doesn't stop at first grade. It's the sector is 0 to 8, and 6, 7, 8-year-olds is usually first, second, third grade, and so it's not only getting children ready for entry into that primary school, but ensuring that they then have that launch pad and succeed into their first years as well. And I think as we look at this aspect of language and culture, particularly in ECD and Native communities, it's wanting to look at what is the impact of some of these things like immersion. What is the impact of having language, whether it is immersion or just a second language taught in these facilities? How is that affecting academic achievement? But also, how is it affecting qualitative aspects like family involvement and teacher involvement in becoming a second language learner? How is it involving, or how is it impacting other aspects of academics in the school? Are other subjects starting to bring in pieces of the language and the culture into their ways of teaching and their lesson plans and things like that. So I think for us, it's those types of things, and it's not just about what's happening at the school, it's also what's happening in the community, what's happening at the family level as well, and oftentimes that's more qualitative, but still just as important.
You know, it really depends upon what you're asking. What I would say is, speaking as the assessment we talked about, is what is your vision? What steps are you going to take? Where are you now? How are you going to know when you get to these steps? And to me, is that me? Data points. And that's what I would look at. The other thing, again, I'll repeat, is approach the foundation, sit down with them, ask them what it is. This is what you want to do. What do you think is really needed? And a lot of our folks really have a good idea where they can find at least some data to help support where you're going. That's what I would suggest. You know, a few other things I was thinking as we're talking is what we look for is looking how does your grant request fit in with your tribal priorities. That's kind of important, isn't it, when you apply for a grant, instead of saying it's really 100th on our list, but we want to do this. No, say our tribe really supports us in this. The other thing is a lot of times we look for stability. You know, how stable is this? Who is your team? Who is your champions? Again, relationships important, get to know, and show that you have a bench. A team really helps. The other thing we've learned is that leaders can come from anywhere in a community. Some of the strongest leaders I've seen is a grandma who came and pounded on my desk and said, we need to have immersion language. We have to have that on a reservation. And boy, I'll tell you, as a leader, she kind of moved me faster than others might have. But I mean, leadership can come from anywhere, and be prepared for that and listen and support. Yeah.
I think, Kathy, your point about stability is critical, because in philanthropy and in nonprofit world, sustainability is thrown around everywhere. But I think it's difficult to think about sustainability in a field like ECD because it is such a long-term field. You don't see the impact for years, for decades. And so it's kind of difficult to have a talk about sustainability because you're talking about, you know, small nonprofits or native-run nonprofits that have to think about how am I going to be sustainable for 10 or 20 years. But it's this aspect of stability. How can funders, how can programs help to support the building of pieces and programs that are stable and can root themselves and can start to grow. And I think stability over sustainability is critical, particularly as we look at continuing to build the momentum for ECD and Native communities, and how can we support that stability over being solely focused on sustainability.
A question here. But I'd like to ask more. Could I, would you accept a friendly amendment?
Yes.
That we continue to reap the benefits of ECD for many decades, but we see the results very quickly, in some ways. At least that's my view.
Thank you for sharing a lot of the insider information. I think that this is one of those beneficial conversations that Native communities need to have. And I kind of sit in two spaces, one in which, as a representative of the American Indian College Fund, we are a philanthropic organization as well. And so I'm thinking about some of the questions that were posed by those that are in the room regarding, data, and regarding how do we articulate our story in such a way that it moves a funder. And I think it's really important for us to figure out who are the people can offer those conversations so that you move forward with the best proposal that you can. I've been working with tribal colleges for about 6 years now, and they're also asking these same questions. They don't know where to start their conversation around grant making. And so I think that process of visioning is really, really important. But also thinking about the kind of data that you do have and the kind of work that you are already doing. I think that's really important for you to honor where you started and sort of the historical foundation of, say, a language immersion program is really important for you to figure out how do you tell that story. To me, as I said in the presentation earlier, I said that Ilisavik started with 0 early childhood speakers in their languageness. And a year later, they had 3, and another year they had 12. And so those numbers can be transformed into percentages in terms of increase. And so it's part of just learning how to figure out what is your story and how do you know that you're growing. And I'm really happy to help those that are in the room around these conversations. And we hold a number of different convenings where we engage others about how our teams learned how to have those conversations. So I invite you to be a part of that. In addition to that, I think it's important to share what do you think is the right amount for the work that you need to do, and where are you going to put your resources. So when I'm working with tribal colleges as well, I'm asking them, it's not enough for you to say that it's to pay for personnel, right? What are those critical positions that you need in order to sustain your programming? And then the other question that often not talked about, because funding is usually about a financial investment, but I often ask the teams, what are the non-financial resources that you are leveraging toward the success of your programming? So volunteer hours, how many people are volunteering to support your program? What are some of the partnerships that you have with trainers that donate part of their time or their fee to your work? How are you negotiating those so that when you receive your funding, that you're able to take a whole team through a professional development opportunity? So, pay attention to the things that are not visible that you're doing and make those visible in your conversations with funders. Because I often ask, are you doing this alone or is it a team? And so that's a part of this conversation about stability and sustainability is being able to show that what you're doing is going to last. And I always ask this question to the project directors, is what you're doing able to sustain itself after you leave? Mm-hmm. And that's a huge question. Who is behind you that you are training to ensure when you exit, there's somebody else at the table? And tell me about that. Tell me that you are ready to do this as a collective. And so I think that that's an invisible part of thinking through your planning strategy for funding, but also it shows that you definitely have a system in place to get to that long-term impact. So I'm volunteering myself. I know I have a lot to do, but I'm absolutely volunteering myself to help you think through ideas. And you have my contact as well, so I'm very helpful to do that. We do this all the time with tribal colleges. We want to invite you to that conversation.
Maybe you'll be in a lot of grants now. Grant proposals.
Thank you. And I just offer perspectives, and maybe Kathleen and Mark can respond too. But I've been a grant seeker the majority of my career. I've been a grant maker, and now I get the opportunity to work with grant makers and do a lot of funder education. And I think one of the pieces of advice that I would really offer is that we need to get out of this deficit mindset we have in Indian country, and we have so many problems that there's days where we just don't even feel like we can get out of bed because they're so big, or we just don't, there's not enough hours in the day. But there's been a lot of research that I've been a part of and other colleagues have been a part about in philanthropy, where this implicit bias begins to be created for a lot of different reasons in society, whether they're stereotypes, just people don't even think we exist anymore. I mean, there's a variety of things that feed into that. But part of it is, in some of that research, is that it's this deficit mentality, and a lot of people just see Indian country through the lens of everything that's wrong, to the point that a funder goes, I don't even know what I can do. The problems are too big for the small amount of money I have. And so I think the advice there is that we need to flip the script. And we need to, I want to build off what Tara was saying. It was such good advice. It's about telling our story, but it's about telling what is working in our communities, even if it's small and it's a small spark, it's a bright spot. We have to be able to kind of start leading our stories, because the more and more that I work with funders, I'm sure Tara gets these phone calls as well sometimes, like you finally get a funder that's really interested, and but they want to know where, like where's something happening where they feel like they might be able to get some traction, as opposed to where all you can talk about is everything that's wrong, but you don't even have a plan yet, so to speak. So I think that's my big advice, is really think about your narrative and your story, and that you're leading with what is working and what can help it work even more, right? And I think that funders really, really need to hear that. And I think, again, just looking at your existing funders, right? You might only have maybe one, but you've got great champions right up there on stage. And I know funders talk. And I think your funder, whatever funders you might have, they're really invested. They don't want to see you, they might not be able to fund you forever, but they want to see your program go, right? So a lot of times they're willing to pick up the phone for you and make a phone call or put in a good reference, because they want to see you be successful. So, but don't just talk to your funder when your grant's up. It's about relationships. And I think, Kathleen, you've done such a good job to talk about that. And these are great people, and it's a two-way relationship. It's not just about getting money from them. So
I'll just comment on that. You are so right. There can be such a deficit mindset. This past year, we actually went to Leech Lake Reservation, and we decided we would do a study, and it was an appreciative inquiry study. We don't want to focus on, we all know the challenges. What are the strengths here? And it was phenomenal. And what came out on top was early childhood, youth, education, the tribal college, as real strengths to build on. And once you give that information to the tribe, then I said, it's your information. Here it is, here's your strengths. But that's a big wow, I think. Our people, we know where our strengths lie too, but we don't always think about that because we're so accustomed, as you said, to be in this deficit mindset. Mm-hmm. It's time to get out of that. We're pretty strong as people. We're still here and we're thriving.
This is our last question, Rob, is that right? Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to offer some ideas from some things that I've heard in my community. And one of those would be to... Oh, I'm a member of the Port Gamble-Sklallam tribe, and I'm also on our New Kayet board, our Economic Development Board. I review all of our Appendix X, our 2% charitable set-aside that come through. And so I wanted to also honor that our tribes are huge donators to our economic, what our economic landscape looks like for our tribes, for our county, and for our state, and for our nation. And think that they are some of our biggest providers, and think that that is an important piece to honor and acknowledge, especially when we look at having career fairs for our tribes, for our children, to be able to say this is a value that we have as giving people, and to tie it in and to honor the work that all of you do. So I wanted to comment on that and say thank you. And then also another idea of using the technology to share stories through digital storytelling. So thank you.
Okay, let's give our panel a big round of applause and thank them for the time today.
I'm going to make two housekeeping announcements. One is I was talking with Gail just before this session, and if anyone is taking a cab out to the airport after this session, maybe come up here, and if you want to carpool or coordinate that a little bit, we could do that up front here. And if anybody has it's a little time, about a half hour before you get on the road, I'd be willing to take you to see our cash services department. We are at a Federal Reserve Bank, and if you want to see what we do here a little bit, I'd be happy to give you a tour. There's items to look at on the side, and I think there is some handout material on the sides. Yeah, and one of the Shakopee reports is over here on the side. Okay.
Hey, I get I guess the pleasure and the pain of saying goodbye to all of you. But first, just let me share a few thoughts, a few comments, if I may. Yesterday, I started the conversation by asking, how are the children? And I said that's the most important question, because we need to think about the well-being of our children and, of course, our children's future. But I also mean it from the economic perspective, because it's the most economically important question, too. Because we know that investing in our children at the very early stages has phenomenal return on investment. And I've also heard throughout the day and a half that we've been here, why the Federal Reserve Bank? How does early childhood education connect with the Federal Reserve Bank? Why are we here? Well, we're here, yes. Was that a hand? We're here. Why are we here? Yeah, right. You know, the Federal Reserve Bank has been working in Indian country for decades, really very deeply and systematically looking at fulfilling our tribal communities' economic goals and objectives. And we do that in really different ways. We do that through the incredible research that the Federal Reserve is renowned for. And you heard Art Rolnick. He had his tremendous work, research here at the Federal Reserve Bank on early childhood development. So there's no question whatsoever that from an economic policy, that early childhood education makes all the difference. By starting early with nurturing and attending to our children, we promote and we secure the future well-being of our nation. So that's why we're here. The Federal Reserve Bank does economic policy. We do Indian country, and we want to combine those two to help support and raise up the economies and the well-being of our Native communities throughout the United States. So the Center for Indian Country Development is committed, thoroughly committed to working with all of you. And as we launch our 5-year initiative on education, we had to start with early childhood development. It's the beginning of life. It's the essence of our life. And we know that not only from an economic perspective, but from a human development perspective, we need to be here and in this place. So we want to lend our support and our resources, which are quite considerable. We're not a funder, but we can bring people together, stakeholders like all of you, thought leaders, change agents, to think big, be bold, and to be the champions and leaders that you are, and to share your ideas. We can be the convener of these thought leaders and change agents and support you in many different ways. We can be that research arm and resource venue for you as well. Next year, we're going to launch right into tribal colleges and universities, and I can't wait to work with Tara Jean Yazzie on all of this work and extension services and think about how we build the whole network and the whole system and design our work around the well-being and the future of our children. So that's the role of the Federal Reserve Bank. That's the role of the Center for Indian Country, is to capture and harness this energy, this deep and rich conversation, and to bring it forward in a very broad way. I also want to let you know that I have an ulterior motive for this gathering. You all are helping us define our work in a lot of different sectors for the next 5 years. We have a 5-year strategic plan. How do we do this work? Where do we need to be? Who do we need to bring on board with us? So I'm gathering all of you to be part of my team, partners in this work, and to really carry it forward in a profound way, to carry our voices to the tribal leadership, to the state and federal agencies, and all the way to Washington, so that we can all advocate for positive and beneficial policy for all of our children and our families. So I want to thank all of you, many of you who've come so far and spent a couple days with us, for being here and sharing very authentically and very sincerely, and know that everything matters. What you've said, what you've shared, what we've heard, and what we're going to take with us, everything matters, and we will share this with you. This is just the beginning, and we'll continue to communicate and share our summaries, our research, and resources with you. Another great announcement is that Fred Fisher is coming to this Center for Indian Country Development. And I have to say thank you very much to Anita and the Casey Family Foundation for supporting the executive fellowship work, because the center is actually only 2 people right now, myself and Heidi Swedberg, our logistics specialist. So we need collaboration, we need partnership, and we are really honored to have that support. I have to say thank you to my extraordinary and brilliant colleague, Rob Grunwald. I just want to give him a tremendous round of applause. He has been deeply involved in early childhood development for many years, and for him to focus on Indian country and to know the essential need and spirit of language immersion and that cultural connection, I'm just so proud to be working with him as a colleague. And we've got Dick Todd, our strategic researcher in the back, and I'm compiling up a research agenda for Dick. And lots of conversation today about research and data, and I'm going to be harnessing all of Dick's time and energy to help support that and bring that back to all of you. We have a tremendous logistics team, Heidi Swedberg, as I mentioned, and all of our facilities people. But mainly, I just want to say thank you again to Sue Woodrow, who has essentially brought me here at this time to do this work, and I am so honored to be your colleague, and I will dearly, dearly miss you. I want to wish you all safe travels to home and family, to go back to your communities. And I want to end with this thought from Sitting Bull, one of our relatives who had an incredible mission in life, and the transition of being, unfettered and free to being reservation-based and under the bureaucracy of the federal government and confined. He had a spirit that was very large and very broad. And I often think lately about what's going on at Standing Rock, which is where my mother's family is from, and our relatives are at Standing Rock. And I know you heard from Dave Archambault this morning, who just came from Standing Rock, drove overnight to be with us this morning. But think of all the attention and all the passion and all the power that movement has brought to bear about the cultural sacredness of tribal lands and tribal people. What if we could harness that passion? What if we could harness that attention? What if we could really drive the importance of children and early childhood development in that large way, in that large space? So I want to challenge all of you. you champions of change and leaders of tribal communities and Native people, to capture that spirit and bring it with you and share it so that we can create this broad compassion and support for our work. And in the words of Sitting Bull, let us put our minds together to see what we can make for our children. Thank you very much. Thank you and safe travels.